Sehr verehrte Damen und Herren, ich begrüße Sie recht herzlich und bedanke mich zugleich bei den Initiatoren für die eröffnete Möglichkeit, als Vertreter der deutsch-amerikanischen Handelskammer zu Ihnen zu sprechen. I don't suppose anybody really understood what I just said.
We did.
I wanted to start this speech on a good note, on the German note, especially because of the fact that my name is Jacquemetton, and I am a dual national. I was born and raised in France, in Lyon, and I realize it's a little awkward to have a Frenchman speak about doing business in Germany, but I'm the product of close relations between Germany and France, which started after the Second World War. I attended a school, a bilingual school, that was set up by a program set up by Charles de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer, whereby we had two professors in each class, one French, one German. And over the course of my career, I've built on that, and I've traveled, and I've been a member of Parliament. I've been an intern in the German Parliament, and also worked in the German Ministry of Labor. So on that note, I want to talk to you today about doing business in Germany, and much of what I'm going to say will apply to doing business almost anywhere else. Really, when you're trying to do business internationally, you have to obviously prepare yourself. You have to do your due diligence, and really, it's not much different from doing business anywhere else in this country, for example. The only difference is that the risks and rewards are magnified, and there are risks that really are very important to take into consideration, and some of them there's really not much you can do about. To give you an example, my family in France is in the import and export of textiles, and when the French government in 1981 was elected, a socialist became president. And within 2 years, the president devaluated the French franc 3 times. Now, when they devaluate a currency, they don't give you advance notice. They just, one day, they make an announcement and they say, well, your currency is worth 8% less. And so these are kind of risks that you need to anticipate when you're trying to do business abroad. But really, doing business internationally itself hasn't changed since the beginning of commerce. In fact, when you think about it, noblemen in the Middle Ages traveling from one country to another would need letters of introduction, letters of credit. They would need to retain attorneys if they were going to do a contract in another country, and they would probably need an interpreter if they didn't speak the language. Those same things are necessary nowadays, although we have certain conventions and treaties that facilitate these exchanges. And I'm thinking here of the United Nations Convention on the International Sale of Goods as a good example. Now, why is developing a relationship with your business abroad, business partner abroad, so important? Well, you've got unforeseen problems. You've got communication errors and differences of opinion. All these you're going to need to resolve amicably if your relationship is to develop, blossom, and eventually bear fruit. I'll give you a good example of that, and this is a true story from one of my colleagues. A German company contracted with an American company to manufacture and distribute its product in the United States. Now, each company was a large company. They all retained a bunch of lawyers, and they hammered out a contract which gave the rights to the American company to manufacture and distribute its product throughout North America. About a year later, the American company finds out that the German company is in talks with a Mexican company to manufacture its product there and distribute its goods there. Now, the first thing the American companies did was they called up the German company and said, hey, you're in breach of our contract. And, what was the whole dispute about? Well, the whole dispute is about the term North America, which is something you would never think about. And even though we lawyers like to draft 50-page documents with 15 pages of definitions, this is one definition they overlooked. In English, the term North America really encompasses Mexico, United States, Canada, and we take this for granted. In German, Nordamerika really signifies the United States and Canada. In fact, if you look in the German dictionary, the Duden, and you look under the word Mexico, the definition for Mexico is a country in Central America. And that was the whole dispute. And now, this sounds, petty and in some instances, but it was a legitimate gripe for both parties. They each thought something was different. Well, how did they resolve the dispute? Well, they had to talk to one another. They had to decide what was best for both parties, because if they were going into a litigation, really this would have been a protracted battle in one country or another. It would have cost thousands of dollars, and at the end, the relationship would have been broken. So it was best to resolve that dispute amicably. And in order to do that internationally, you have to develop ties on a personal level. Now, how do you do that? Well, first of all, when you travel abroad, you have to approach the whole process with an open mind. You have to be objective. Sometimes you have to be self-critical or introspective. You have to be adaptable. You have to be self-confident. And you have to be thick-skinned. Because whatever you do, there'll be problems, faux pas, unanticipated circumstances along the way. I'll give you a personal example. When I worked in the German parliament, after a few months, I had a German girlfriend. And of course, everybody in the office was real interested in knowing exactly what this was all about. Well, after a weekend where I had met my girlfriend's family, well, the people in the office kind of ganged up on me and said, well, tell us about him. So I said, in German, I said, die Familie hat 3 Tochter. And everybody started laughing. And, I didn't know what I had said. And so I was kind of embarrassed, and everybody just couldn't stop laughing. So after a couple minutes, one of the secretaries says, well, the plural for daughter, Tochter, in German is not regular. The plural for daughter is Tochter. And what you just said is the family has 3 tarts. So you have to be able to laugh these things off and take it in stride. But I think, in my experience, what most of us don't realize is that we're all human beings. We've all been raised in a particular culture and environment, and that it affects the way we view life, we view business, and interact socially. Now, political and economic social systems vary greatly from one country to another. Part of it is based on history, religion, even some people attribute this to weather. And it's an issue that continues to be debated today. Nevertheless, you need to address this, and you need to be able to deal with it. So I'm just going to give you a few facts about Germany to try to put this into perspective. Germany is about half the size of Texas, but it has 81 million inhabitants. Texas has about 17 million. I don't know if you can picture yourself in Germany, but if you were in Amarillo, pick a city, you'd be maybe in Aachen in Germany, which is Aix-la-Chapelle in French. But picture yourself being in the same city, but with 10 times more population. Instead of being a city of 180,000 people, all of a sudden you're in a city of 1.8 million people. And every other city in Texas mushroomed 10 times. So you'd be wall-to-wall people here in Texas. You have 170 million people living in Texas. So that affects the way Germans interact with one another and the way they view life and business in general. Now put on top of that the fact that Germany is basically surrounded by 9 different countries. You've got the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Poland, and Denmark. All these countries border Germany. Now can you imagine cutting Texas in half and putting foreign countries surrounding Texas? If you're in Aachen, you're basically maybe 30 miles from France, maybe 50 miles from Luxembourg, 70 miles from Belgium, 100 miles from the Netherlands, maybe 150 miles from Switzerland. Now, I may not be getting all these things right, but because my geography, having not lived in Aachen, I can't tell you exactly what the distance is, but think of it, if you're driving an hour, you could be in 3 different countries with 3 different currencies, speaking 3 different languages with 3 different political systems. In fact, when you think about it, Germany, one in every 3 workers in Germany works directly for export. As a percentage of the gross national product, Germans export more than any other country in the world. So Germans are pretty much used to doing this. In fact, most people in business in Germany speak at least one foreign language, and that language will be either Russian, French, or English. So Germans in general are much better prepared to do business internationally than we are. I'll just glance over the political system, and I'll be glad to answer more questions. But basically, Germany is a parliamentary democracy. It's a federal system. It has 16 states. It has a Bundestag, which is the House of Representatives, a Bundesrat, which is a Senate. And the main difference with the Senate in Germany is that the senators aren't elected directly by the people, but are representatives of each state. Now put on top of that the European Union, which has its own structure, including a commission, which is made up of representatives of each different country. It has rotating presidencies. Every 6 months, representatives from one country run the commission and the commission's agenda for 6 months. There's a European Parliament, and there's a European Court of Justice. Now, the legal system is also different. You've got a civil code, which in this country is alien. We're used to common law, which is decisional law from one court, and which will have binding effect on another court. In Germany, the German civil code basically tells you everything you need to know about your rights in a particular area. The roles of judges and attorneys is totally different. Judges, for example, in Germany are allowed to ask questions, which here does not happen. Here, judges are basically referees. The lawyers do all the work. In Germany, the judge will ask questions, has the ability to appoint experts to look into a matter. And the whole system of litigation is totally different. For example, if you're a plaintiff, you have to prove your entire case. And if one element of your case is not there, you lose. And if you lose the suit, you have to pay the defendant's attorney's fees, which is much different from this country. And really, the whole approach to litigation is different, and that has a big impact on business. For example, you can't really get insurance to cover punitive damages in Europe. Why? Because punitive damages don't exist. So for German companies that manufacture products to be sent to the U.S., one of the biggest worries is how are we going to deal with litigation in this country? Because the exposure is so much broader than it would be in their own country. Now, to me, the most important aspect of doing business internationally is to be able to develop those relationships. Because I've seen so many instances where really the law is not going to help you. And the only way you can resolve your problems is through negotiation. Now, I've brought with me a book today by an Englishman. His name is Richard D. Lewis, and it's entitled When Cultures Collide, Managing Successfully Across Cultures. Now, in it, Mr. Lewis speaks of different cultures, different countries, and there's a chapter on Germany and a chapter on the United States. And I thought that it would be an eye-opener to read a few passages from this book and give you an impression of what someone thinks of Germans and of Americans, so that you can put that into perspective when you want to do business abroad and in Germany. Now, I've got some leave-behind copies of my speech, which also have the entire chapter on Germany and the entire chapter on the United States. So, with your indulgence, I'll read a few passages. Germans have their own particular style of conducting meetings and negotiations, and you may find those procedures with big German companies are much more formalized than in your own country. It is generally advisable to adopt a rather more formal approach with Germans at meetings and to note the following German characteristics to which one must react appropriately. Germans will arrive at the meeting well dressed and with a disciplined appearance. You must match this. They will observe hierarchical seating and order of speaking. They will arrive well informed as to the business and expect you to be also. They do not concede their case or arguments easily, but tend to look for common ground. This is often your best approach to make progress. They believe they are more efficient, than others, and do not change position easily. They compartmentalize their arguments, each member speaking about his or her specialty. They expect your side to do the same. They are willing to make decisions within meetings, unlike the Japanese or the French, but they are always cautious. They generally stick to what they have agreed orally. If you're selling to them, they will question you aggressively on what are German strong points, e.g. quality of goods, delivery dates, and competitive price. Be ready. They expect in the end to get the very best, meaning lowest price. They may only give you a little trial business, even at that. Take it. It will lead to much more business later if they are satisfied. Now, I think just by reading these bullets from this book, you can see that although Germans aren't really much different than Americans, they do approach things in a different fashion. Now, interestingly, Mr. Lewis, when he writes the chapter about Americans, he devotes a whole subchapter entitled How to Deal with Americans. And I have to tell you that a lot of this is pretty much true. And you know, people will look at you that way when you go abroad. American business people have the reputation of being the toughest in the world, but they are in many respects the easiest to deal with. That is because their business philosophy is uncomplicated. Their aim is to make as much money as they can, as quickly as they can, using hard work, speed, opportunism, power, the power also of money itself, as the means towards this end. Northern Europeans are well placed to deal with Americans successfully. Their reputation as straightforward managers is well received by the open, frank Americans, who often get seriously irritated by what they see as the devious manners of Latins and Orientals. At meetings, Americans show the following tendencies. They are individualistic. They like to go it alone without checking with the head office. Anything goes unless it has been restricted. They introduce informality immediately, take their jackets off, use first names, discuss personal details, including family. They put their cards on the table right from the start, then proceed on an offer and counter-offer basis. They often have difficulty when the other side doesn't reveal what they want. They want yes in principle and will work out the details later, but they can be very tough in the details and check on everything in spite of apparent trust. Germans, French, and others prefer to settle details first. They don't like lulls or silence during negotiations. They are used to making up their mind fast. They're quick on the draw. They regard negotiating as problem solving through give and take based on respective strength. They do not appreciate that the other side may have only one position. I don't know how much you've taken from my reading these passages on Germans and Americans, but suffice it to say, people approach things totally differently. And if you're negotiating a deal or developing a business relationship, you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to be able to adapt to the business situation and develop a bond, trust with your business partner. Because, as I've stated, there are a lot of unforeseen circumstances that crop up. Now, as an attorney, most attorneys like to think that they can resolve everything and they can draft a contract that is bulletproof. Well, that's not true. And attorneys differ, and I'm sure I'll pick quite a few fights with a lot of people. But I find that really, if you use professionals judiciously to help you do your due diligence, to help make sure that you see all the pitfalls in the road, that's the best time to use an attorney or anyone else. Because once you've picked a fight internationally, I can tell you there are almost only losers. I hope this has been helpful to you. And once again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.